tell me to do something for God and country and go back to work?
That's a good one right there.
I'm gonna kick your Tom.
Richard Old Man Harrison, the tough but lovable patriarch of Pawn Stars, went from humble beginnings to creating a family empire that captivated millions. His no-nonsense approach to business and his TV persona made him a household name. But what if the story behind his rise to fame and his legacy is much deeper than what we saw on screen? Recently, shocking new details have surfaced, revealing a side of Richard Harrison few knew existed. Stay tuned to uncover the truth. The Pawn Star who became a legend. Richard Harrison, who became famous as the Old Man on the reality TV show Pawn Stars, wasn't always the person that millions of people knew and loved. Richard was born in North Carolina into a poor family. His childhood was not exciting at all. He learned how important it is to work hard, follow rules, and show respect while in the U.S. Navy for more than 20 years. But this event changed him into the man who would later start a family business worth millions of dollars. He started working in pawn shops when he opened the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop in Las Vegas in the late 1980s. At first it was a small business, but Richard's keen eye for rare things and straightforward attitude quickly made it a popular spot in the area. That being said, Richard's life really changed after Pawn Stars aired in 2009. Richard became a TV star thanks to the reality show that showed how the pawn shop really works. With his quick wit and years of business knowledge, he became a fan favorite right away. That being said, Richard played a lot more than just a grumpy, strict dad on the show. He was great at negotiating and running a business. He also kept the Pawn Stars team together. The show's success depended on his friendship with his son Rick Harrison, and later with his grandson Corey. It also showed how complicated family relationships were, both on and off the screen. Richard was on the show to show off the toughness and determination that helped him build an empire, not just to entertain fans. Richard's rise to fame wasn't just due to how popular the show was, though. There was something else going on as well. A man with personal problems, family problems, and having to make tough decisions that would affect the future of his business was hidden beneath the famous father. Pawn Stars showed Richard's life in a fun way, but the real story of his struggles and how he became successful has only just started to come to light. One thing becomes clear as we learn more about Richard Harrison's life and legacy. This wasn't just the story of a grumpy TV host who loved making deals. His journey was full of struggles, sacrifices, and secret parts that not many people really understand. But what stories were kept from the public about this man who charmed so many, the man behind the business? To understand how smart Richard Harrison was, we have to go back to his early years, which were full of hardships and a strong determination to stay alive. Richard didn't come from a wealthy or privileged family. In fact, he started his trip in the poor town of Danville, Virginia. Growing up in a time when hard work was the only way to get by, Richard's youth shaped the relentless drive he became famous for. Richard did something that changed his life. He joined the U.S. Navy after high school. For more than 20 years, he proudly served his country by traveling the world and learning the discipline that would later make him who he is. He wasn't just serving in the Navy, he was also learning how to be strong. Richard often talked about how those years taught him how to deal with problems, plan ahead, and value structure, all of which would be very useful as a business. Richard had to face a tough truth when he left the Navy in 1981. It wasn't easy to go back to normal life. He had to take care of his family and wasn't very rich. He went into business because he was determined to make a name for himself. However, success did not just appear out of nowhere. Early on, he tried his hand at many businesses, including one that didn't work out, running a restaurant. There were failures in these projects that would have stopped most people, but not Richard. When Richard moved his family to Las Vegas, things changed for the better. Richard took his biggest risk yet when he opened a pawn shop in the city, which is known for its bright lights and endless possibilities. He opened the Gold and Silver Pawn Shop with his son Rick in the early 1980s. The shop wasn't fancy. It was just a simple place tucked away in the middle of a busy city. But Richard's straightforward attitude and keen eye for valuable things made their business stand out right away. Richard never stopped working. He often stayed at the shop for hours on end, making deals and getting to know customers. It wasn't just about making money. He wanted to give his family something that would last. But running a pawn shop wasn't easy. Richard had to fight in a market that was already full, and he didn't know if the shop would stay open from one month to the next. But he never gave up on his goal. When Rick saw how hard his father worked, he started thinking of ways to get more people to know about their business in the early 2000s. This was the big turning point. They talked about the idea of making their pawn shop into a reality TV show. There was a huge change with this choice, not just for the gold and silver pawn shop, but for the whole Harrison family. The first episode of Pawn Stars aired in 2009, and the rest is history. All of a sudden, the small pawn shop became well known, and Richard solidified his image as a smart, tough businessman. The show's success wasn't just luck, though. It was the result of decades of hard work, staying strong and being ready to take risks. The Harrison dynasty. People admired Richard Harrison for how smart he was at business, but they also loved him as a family man. Richard loved his wife Joanne, his son Rick, and his grandson Corey more than anything else in the world. Aside from Pawn Stars, they were his world. The Harrison family relationships were just as complicated as the old things they bought and sold on the show. Richard and Joanne fell in love in high school and stayed together for many years. They went through life's ups and downs together, making a family and a relationship that will last. It was Joanne who helped Richard through the good and bad times in his work. She was the quiet but steady force behind his success. The fact that they were married wasn't just a relationship. It showed how much Richard valued loyalty and persistence. Richard's bond with his son Rick was one of the most important parts of his legacy. Even though they had a strong bond, Richard's strict love style also shaped it. He thought people should work hard and be responsible, and he often pushed Rick to do better. There were some problems with this scenario. Rick had new ideas that didn't always agree with Richard's, especially when it came to running the pawn shop. But these differences made them respect each other even more. Richard's grandson Corey joined the business when Rick made the decision to do so. It was the start of a new family era. Corey learned how to work in the pawn shop from his father and grandpa. That being said, dealing with Richard wasn't easy. Richard was known for having high standards and not being afraid to say what he thought, especially when he thought Corey should do more. People saw how families work on TV, which gave them a sense of the ups and downs of having a family business in real life. When people argued passionately about an item's worth or showed mutual respect, Pawn Stars became more than just a show about pawning. It became a story about family. Richard had an impact on more than just business skills. His family learned to be very loyal and committed from him. This was clear from the way Rick and Corey worked hard to carry on the work Richard started. The Harrisons stayed grounded by remembering the beliefs Richard had taught them, even when fame brought them new problems. But maybe the most impressive thing about Richard as a family man was how he could balance his tough exterior with real moments of warmth. People knew him for his sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude, but those closest to him saw a different side. They saw a man who loved his family very much and would do anything to help them. What kind of bond did Richard have with his kids that made Pawn Stars what it is today? The secrets he kept hidden. There were many sides to Richard Harrison, who was the beloved old man of Pawn Stars. His fans loved his quick wit and no-nonsense attitude, but not many people knew about the personal fights he fought behind the scenes. Under the rough exterior he wore, there was a man who had been through a lot of physical and mental pain. Health was one of the hardest things for Richard. As the years went by, it became clear that his health problems were getting worse. People who liked the show saw that he was showing up less and less, but not many people knew what he was really going through. Richard had Parkinson's disease, which slowly but surely hurt his health. He kept up his part on the show for as long as he could, even though he was in pain and couldn't do certain things. His unwavering spirit was shown by how he dealt with things in a quiet way. But his health wasn't the only thing that was hard for him. The stresses of fame were also hard. When Pawn Stars went viral around the world, Richard became the center of attention of a lot of people. It wasn't easy for a man who had lived most of his life out of the public eye. Every move he made on and off the show was looked at closely and judged. It was extra stressful for him to have to balance the demands of being a reality TV star with his duties as the head of the family. Richard also had problems with his family on a personal level. His tough love style was clear on the show, but it wasn't always easy for the people he cared about. There were times when things got tough between people, especially when it came to business choices. Richard had high standards and harsh criticisms that sometimes caused arguments, especially with his son Rick and grandson Corey. Even though these problems were usually fixed, they left emotional scars that weren't talked about much. One of the things about Richard's life that may not be well known is how hard it was for him to keep up his public image. His fans thought of him as the calm, old man, who was always ready with a quick retort or a wise comment. Behind the scenes, though, he was struggling with how to live up to that picture. Millions of people had high hopes for him, and like many famous people, he sometimes wondered if he could really live up to the legend he had become. Even so, Richard never tried to be understood or felt sorry for. He kept his problems to himself and used the strength he had gained in the Navy and as a self-made company to deal with them. For Richard, showing weakness wasn't a choice. His plan was simple. He would face every problem head-on, no matter how impossible it seemed. Richard Harrison was a real hero not just on Pawn Stars but in real life as well, because he could keep going even when things got hard. He wasn't someone who wanted praise for going through hard times. He instead thought about the bigger picture, how to take care of his family, leave a lasting memory, and stay true to his beliefs. Why Richard Harrison is cold in some way. Richard Harrison was liked for being smart and funny, but some people didn't like how cold and unbending he could be. His straightforward attitude wasn't just for show. It was a big part of who he was and how he thought about life. Richard believed in tough love and wasn't afraid to make the tough choices, whether it was in business or with his family. Richard's tough love attitude at the pawn shop was both his best quality and the thing that made people dislike him the most. He expected everyone to do their best, whether they were family or co-workers. Richard didn't accept being average. He didn't sugarcoat his criticism if someone didn't meet his standards. People often saw him scolding Rick or Corey for choices he didn't agree with, and his bluntness became a trademark of his on-screen personality. But this method wasn't liked by everyone. There were people who thought Richard's ways were too harsh, especially when it came to his family. During several occasions, his arguments with Corey seemed very heated. People from the outside might have thought Richard was too tough on his grandson. But the people who knew him best knew that his opinion was based on love. He wanted the best for his family and thought that tough lessons were the only way to get there. This way of thinking went beyond the family and into the business. When people bought and sold things at the pawn shop, Richard was known for having strict rules. He was almost psychic when it came to spotting a bad deal, and he didn't mind telling people they were lying when he thought they were. Many people respected him for this, but it also made him a controversial figure. Some customers and even other sellers thought Richard was being too rude, but he never changed his mind. He wouldn't give up his ethics for anything. But Richard's strict parenting style wasn't just about keeping high standards. It was also a reflection of the hard times he had been through himself. He had been through a lot of hard times and wanted to make sure that his family and business never had to go through the same things. In many ways, his strict attitude was a shield that kept what he had worked so hard to build safe. But Richard wasn't immune to trouble either. Some of the choices he's made over the years have caused fans and family to argue. One of the most important was that he chose not to include one of his kids in his will. The full reasons for this move were never given, but it made a lot of people wonder how complicated Richard's family life is. What did this have to do with his tough love attitude, or was there more to the story? Even though his ways were criticized, Richards often got results. The gold and silver pawn shop did very well under his direction, and his family continued what he started. Richard thought that the ends were worth the means. He didn't care about being liked. What he cared about was being respected. In that way, he was successful. Untold stories from the set of Pawn Stars. Some people called Richard Old Man Harrison Pawn Stars. The show was more than just a TV show. It was a cultural event. Millions of people were drawn to him because of his sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude. But what they saw on screen wasn't the whole story. Behind the scenes, Richard was just as important. He had an impact on the show in ways that went beyond the times he was on camera. Richard made it clear from the start that being real was important. Neither playing a role nor reading a script interested him. He is said to have said, "If I can't be myself, then I'm not doing it." This attitude set the tone for the whole show, and Richard made sure that Pawn Stars showed how the gold and silver pawn shop really works. But it wasn't always easy to stay true to reality, especially when making TV shows, which is a very stressful job. One of the most talked about stories from behind the scenes was about how Richard insisted on making the show real. Ideas were often brought up by producers to add drama or make problems seem worse, but Richard refused to give in. He would say, "That's not how we do things." His honesty won him respect from the crew, even if it made things tense at times. Then there were the funnier parts, those funny bits of Richard's that didn't always make it to air. Fans loved his one-liners, and his jokes off-camera often made the team laugh out loud. In one story, a very stubborn customer brought in something that wasn't quite right. Richard made a joke after the deal fell through. "That guy sells more fiction than the library." The crew loved the comment, even though it wasn't in the episode. It showed how funny Richard is. But not every moment behind the scenes was funny. There were disagreements on the Pawn Stars set, and Richard wasn't afraid to say what he thought. One event that stands out is a dispute about how to handle a rare collectible. Richard had strong feelings about the appraisal, which led to a heated argument with the evaluator that the producers hired. The argument was over, but it showed how strict Richard was and how ready he was to stand up for what he thought was right. Richard also had a softer side that fans rarely saw when he wasn't on TV. People on the crew often talked about how kind and generous he was. Often he helped crew members who were having money problems by giving them advice and money once in a while. These small acts of kindness gave a fuller picture of the man who seemed tough on the outside. One of the most surprising things that was revealed behind the scenes was how much Richard helped to shape the direction of the show. Even though Rick was the show's main character, Richard had a big impact on every part of making it. He had a great sense of what people would like, and would often suggest what should be shown or how scenes should be handled. His knowledge and instincts were very helpful to the production team. Some of the behind-the-scenes stories were not so nice, though. Some team members said that Richard's need to be perfect could be scary. He didn't like it when people made mistakes and wasn't afraid to tell them when they weren't up to par. Even though some people didn't like him, they agreed that his high standards helped the show do so well. The parts of Pawn Stars that fans never got to see are one of the biggest secrets. What did they do after the cameras stopped? Members of the crew have hinted at heated arguments, funny stunts, and very emotional times that were too private to air. As always, Richard was in the middle of everything. He had to balance his part as the beloved old man with the complicated things that happened in real life. The final days. Over the course of his later years, Richard Harrison had both successes and problems. Fans noticed that he was on Pawn Stars less often as his health started to get worse. They didn't know how big of a battle he was really fighting behind the scenes. Richard was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2018. This is a condition that gets worse over time and makes it harder for him to move and speak. This was a terrible blow to a man who had always been proud of how strong and independent he was. As usual, though, Richard dealt with his illness with quiet respect. He worked as long as he could because he didn't want the cancer to define him. Richard's health problems didn't just affect him, they affected everyone in his family. There were big changes in Rick, Corey, and the rest of the Harrison family. Their father and grandpa had passed away. Corey in particular has talked about how hard it was to see the man he looked up to deal with such huge problems. Still, Richard was a source of strength for his family, even when he was at his best. As Richard's health got worse, people started to wonder what would happen to him. How could Pawn Stars go on without its main character? How would his family run the business he had worked so hard to build? That was more important. These questions hung over Richard's last days like a dark cloud. The damage that Richard's fall did to his public image was one of the saddest things about it. Fans had seen him for years as the calm, old man, but in his last shows it was clear that he was having a hard time. Some fans were worried, and others made guesses about how bad his situation was. Richard stayed strong through it all and wouldn't let his illness take away from his memory. Richard's death on June 25, 2018 was the end of an era. There were tributes from all over the world, from fans, friends, and family who were happy about his life and work. But even as everyone mourned, there were still questions. What did Richard's last moments look like? Were there problems in the family that hadn't been solved? And most importantly, how would his work be remembered? After Richard's death, new information started to come out. Some of these revelations made me cry because they showed how much he loved his family and how deep his character was. Others caused more debate, making people wonder about his choices and how complicated his relationships were. One story that really hits home is about Richard's choice to leave one of his kids out of his will. The reasons for this choice are still unknown, but it led to a lot of talk. What did this have to do with Richard's tough love attitude, or was there more to the story? Like a lot of other things in Richard's life, the truth may never be fully known. Even though there are still a lot of questions, one thing is for sure. Richard Harrison changed the world forever. He was strong, determined, and loved his family all through his life, from his time in the war to his time as the old man on Pawn Stars. His life and work continue to inspire us and teach us how important it is to be true to ourselves and the power of hard work. What terrible new information about Richard's last days has come to light? What's next for the Harrison family? Old Man left behind more than just a great business and a popular TV show. He also left behind a legacy based on family, resilience, and hard work. His death left a hole in the hearts of his family and friends, as well as in the culture of Pawn Stars, a show that had become linked to his name. Everyone had the same thought: what will happen next? From the start, Richard made sure that his family was the most important part of the gold and silver pawn shop. His son Rick had already taken over as boss long before Richard died, which made the change for the business go smoothly. Harrison Corey, the third generation, continued to carry on the family name. He showed the same smart instincts and love of history that his grandfather taught him. The loss of their father, on the other hand, brought new problems. First, they had to figure out how to talk about Richard's death on the show. Fans loved the way Pawn Stars worked, and Richard's rough but likable attitude was a big part of that. Without him, there was a clear change. There were touching tributes to Richard on the show, which praised him not only as a businesswoman, but also as the show's heart and soul. Watchers were moved to tears as Rick and Corey told personal stories that showed how sad they were and how much Richard had meant to them. The Harrison family knew they had to move on, even though they were sad about the loss. Richard's work attitude had always been based on being tough, facing problems head-on and not giving up. Rick and Corey made their dedication to the shop and the show even stronger in honor of him. They started adding new segments that talked about Richard's legacy. This way, even if he wasn't there personally, his presence would always be felt. The family had to think about the future of their business after Richard died. How strong would the Pawn Stars name be without the old man? The Harrisons did a good job of adapting. They added new people to the show and used their shared past to help tell the stories. Richard's teachings and personality were at the heart of the stories. Many people saw Rick as the more realistic one. He became the de facto mentor and lived by many of the ideals Richard had taught him. The family also had to deal with another problem: how to keep Richard's memory alive in a meaningful way. It wasn't just about keeping Harrison's image alive for his family. It was also about following the rules he set. As a child, Richard taught Corey the value of tough love. Corey often talked about how his grandfather's lessons had affected his choices. Corey once said, "He taught me everything I know and still taught me how to learn more." Richard left behind a lot more than just his family and friends. He stood for the American dream, which is the belief that with hard work and drive, you can make something that lasts. Many people were motivated by his story of how he went from having a struggling business to becoming a TV star. He showed them that it's never too late to build a company. Fans shared their own stories of strength and victory, often saying that the old man was an inspiration to them, even after Richard had died. Still, there was the question of how the Harrison family would deal with such a terrible loss. Rick knew the answer was to follow the ideals his father had taught him. He kept running the gold and silver pawn shop with the same care and dedication that Richard had, making sure that every choice he made honored his father's memory. While Corey kept the business traditional, he added a modern touch that showed how the game of pin was changing. The Harrisons worked to keep Richard's memory alive, but they also had to deal with the fact that TV was always changing. Pawn Stars stayed an important part of culture, but the fact that its founder was no longer there made people wonder how long it would last. Would the show still do well without the old man? Or would it slowly end, like a lot of reality TV shows? The family's drive to keep going showed that they didn't want the show or Richard's legacy to end anytime soon. It's not just a cash shop or a TV show that Richard Harrison left behind. It's about the things that he believed in, like family coming first, working hard, and being honest. These values continue to guide the Harrison family through life without him, making sure that his impact is still strong. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Join the conversation in the comments and be sure to click on the next video popping up on your screen.